Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here. You know, I realize that there are quite a few folks who are here that, while we are here at the Science Center, may not be as familiar with the Science Center. And one thing that I always like to point out in these presentations is that in my bio, one of the things that is not referenced is that when I was younger, I was a somewhat renowned archaeologist. And I found most of those artifacts in my backyard. And I took those artifacts to the then Maryland Academy of Sciences, where a wonderful gentleman would take a look at them and say, you know, you might have something here. And we'll take a look at it, and we'll archive it, and we'll set it aside. And then he would quietly usher me off to other exhibits. And thus I became a fairly renowned geologist, and then a fairly renowned astronomer, and a fairly renowned ornithologist, and all through the Science Center experience. So today what I'm going to talk about a little bit is a combination of the concept and the technology a bit. And let me just start for a moment with what we traditionally call the Learning Society. And we've talked about this in many different ways before. I'm using actually some references that come from Cisco Corporation's document of a few years back that emphasizes the importance of learning as an active and social process, that we focus on motivation as being critical to effective learning, that learners bring different knowledge to a new learning challenge, that learners start from different places and follow different pathways to achieve that learning outcome, and that we basically need to look at knowledge as a holistic approach because of all of these different factors that go into it. Now, we could look at that from the standpoint of where we stand in test scores. And all of us have heard about the challenges we face being 27th in science, 20th in math in the latest OECD review on this basis. That is compelling in its own right. But I would point out that the OECD has also done rankings of countries that focus not so much on the test score, but on what they call curiosity in science. And what they are finding is that countries that do very well on test scores do not necessarily do as well, and sometimes are much lower when it comes to the interest in science. With all due respect to my colleagues from Finland, Finland always scores very high on the test scores, but Finland is challenged to create an interest in science in the culture. That is a learning culture question that we have to address. Now, there are other ways of looking at this. There are two studies that I have found very interesting. One is that 8th grade students who indicate an interest in science or in a science career are 3 times more likely to pursue a college degree in the sciences than those who simply do well in high school on standardized tests. And when you survey most scientists, you will hear over and over again that they became interested in science by age 11. And that by and large, it is that informal science experience, the out-of-school science experience, that is so impactful in that decision. Over and over, we hear this point, that average Americans spend less than 5% of their lives in the school classroom, and that more and more evidence is demonstrating that most science is learned outside of the school, what we are terming informal science learning. So this is the premise that we are working with today, that learning is a hybrid of formal education and self-directed discovery that can be brought together and enhanced through the effective and purposeful application of digital technologies. That is the premise that we're revolving around in our discussions here today. What's interesting about it, and again I draw on the Cisco report in this, is that to date, technology has made some significant contributions to the education system that revolve primarily around organization, better administration, better ability to deliver information. What we were a little slower at, but I think we are poised at the crossroads, if you will, for change, is how we affect that relationship between the teaching process and the learning process. And we're hearing that in some of the discussions that we've already had this morning. Anyone recognizes that we have the opportunity. One only needs to look at the amount of time that youth are spending online daily, and obviously it's going up with age and more at younger ages. So I want to move this now into the discussion of digital media in the museum setting itself. And let me focus on what I consider to be what I'm calling, for want of a better word, the traditional debates. And I think those debates revolve around, on the one hand, the role of digital media in learning itself. And then on the other hand, traditional definitions of the museum environment. And these are interrelated issues that we are facing. When we consider digital media in the museum setting, the first approach refers to the opportunities. With respect to opportunities, we can say that media technology is a dynamic form of engagement, that the reason why we might be utilizing it is to attract and retain audiences, quite frankly, that we recognize that we can extend the museum's reach when we do this, that we realize that we are reflecting trends across other areas of society, that we are becoming a digitized society in so many ways, and that therefore, as we've pointed out over and over again, we're becoming generationally relevant, if you will, but when we bring digital technology into our museum communities. But there are challenges. The first and foremost, we've referred to already, is does the question of digital technology diminish the authenticity that we speak about in the museum setting? Does it cause us to value the experience more than the knowledge creation? Are these correlated in ways that we hope they are, and are we able to really demonstrate that clearly? There's also an interesting element that we hear coming up time and again, which is straining the idea of ownership. What is the difference in a museum environment between owning an artifact and having photographs of the artifact and talking about the artifact and digitizing the artifact? At what point have we lost not only the authenticity, but any sense of really possession of something that is of value? And thus, at the same time, are we blurring lines between what we would consider to be the traditional public museum and other commercial entertainment venues? Now, I know that even as I go through these, there are those of you who are questioning the challenges themselves. The last one I find kind of interesting, but I read periodically in articles, which is when you present an exciting environment, as we like for our science centers to be exciting environments, do you in some way somehow diminish the inherent value of other traditional educational settings? Is the Science Center presenting not a complement, but a counterpoint to a school classroom, or in some ways diminishing the value of any other traditional environment? We'd like to think that we are complementary. Are we indeed complementary? Well, I propose here to challenge the challenges just a bit. The first has to do with historical trends. Throughout the entire history recorded as we know it of museums, there have always been issues of change and always been discussions revolving around sensationalism versus scholarly pursuit, between whether or not museums are elitism and focused on more of a restricted access approach, or is it intended to be a popular environment, something that opens up to all in every conceivable way possible? And what constitutes a novel technology? Was it a novel technology when we put slides next to the artifact? Or was it a novel technology when we introduced movies into the museum environment? Each step of the way has introduced what we might term a novel technology. My second challenge is that science centers, by definition, have already affected that transformation. They have recognized, by virtue of being, by and large, non-curator, experiential learning-based environments, and I'm speaking generally now, recognizing that science centers are a mixture of these attributes, but by and large, this transition has meant that in a non-curator-based environment, in a visitor-based environment, the introduction of new technologies is not only automatic, it's almost essential to the way we do our business. So, quickly stated, our science centers and museums today are inspiring a desire to experience and learn in a free choice environment. Free choice environment is a term of art that we are using now that refers to the ability to move from interest area to interest area and not in a rote fashion. We are obviously considering ourselves, and we believe to be creative complements to the formal education environment, and we want to encourage that interest and that exploration and that sense of desire to be involved in science, which may or may not lead to actual careers in science. What's interesting in this process is that we are translating complex science into comprehensible, relevant form for the general public. And when we do that, we build trust between the scientific establishment and the general public. And this is critically important because ultimately our goal is to raise public awareness about the science behind societal issues, to promote an objective and scientifically based approach to decisions that will be made by individuals or by communities in that regard, with regard to science in their lives. So this is my quick promo slide. The Association of Science Technology Centers was founded back in 1973 with 20 founding science institutions. Today we are 650 member institutions in all 50 states and 50 countries around the world. We are seeing among our members about 95 million visits a year at our science centers. And only about 20 million of those are school children in the form of school groups. The rest are what I call self-selectors, folks who say, you know, I'd like to learn more about science. I'm going to go to a science center or a science museum and learn more about it. This is a very important community for us. Now, when we look at our science centers, 90% of them, more than 90% of them, in fact, are involved in classroom activities, demonstrations related to classrooms, working in school outreach programs. 82% of our members are doing teacher training programs in some form or another. Some of them are certifying science teachers, other forms of workshops. They're working with curriculum materials. They're offering homeschoolers new opportunities. They are targeting senior citizens. It is a lifelong learning process. I'm not sure I'm into the pre-K to gray, because that would mean that I stopped learning at about 30, because it's been gray for a long time. Well, nearly half of our science centers are actually doing youth employment programs in science-related activities. It's a stimulating environment in so many different ways. So this was a science center. In fact, this is a science center not only of history, but it happens to be a science center that exists today. It's in France. It's an institute for arts and métiers. And what's interesting about this is the transition that they made in such a short period of time. This is the Science Center as you may have seen it historically. Very quickly they said hands-on is important. And so they began to put in small objects that demonstrated hands-on learning. And today, in almost no time at all, you can go online and you can look at digital activities, online training. You can link what's going on in that science center directly to an online experience. They recognized, like so many others of our science centers, that this had to happen and it had to happen quickly. That's the way it should look in the science center environment if you're truly, truly reaching your public effectively. So what I want to propose is that science centers today are taking an integrated approach to utilizing digital technologies. It is clear that they are seeking to enhance the visitor experience. They're also extending the learning opportunity beyond the four walls of the institution itself. They're networking with other learning environments. And more they're learning how to use the digital technology to monitor and evaluate the success and the impact of the digital technology experience in their settings. So when we talk about enhanced experiences, these are words that we all use all the time. It's immersive, it's experiential, it's immediate, it's versatile, it's going to be dynamic and story-driven. These are all words that we use all the time, and they are more and more relevant in what we do. So it can be something that is highly complex. The 4D theater, for example, which has a 3D film environment with other effects going on at the same time. A very complex process of using digital technologies. Or it can be something very simple, like video walls. The National Geographic Society has very effective video walls that are very impactful and meaningful, and people take time and look at them and examine them very closely. It can be an informative experience. Our science centers are really struggling with introducing new technologies and not having it become a history lesson because the technology is moving so rapidly that you can't get the exhibit together. So the idea of taking something like digital technology and making the sheer discussion of it part of the exercise itself. It allows you to bring history to current practice to the future, all in the same kind of an exhibit setting. It can be highly, highly interactive. This is an example of creating your own virtual reality in something called the Visual World Investigate Laboratory in North Carolina, where they are bringing all of this data together. This is a group yet personalized experience, all done within the Science Center setting. I have to digress from my own slides here and tell you that if you all haven't had a chance to visit the Liberty Science Center in Jersey City, you should see the way that they have connected hospitals, 5 hospitals in the New York area, all to the Liberty Science Center digitally. And so you can watch surgery in action. And the surgeon is working and is speaking to you at the same time, as is everyone else in the operating theater. I watched a young group come together recently, and one of the students raised his hand. He said, I don't see any blood. I expected to see blood. And the surgeon said, well, if you look down here, you can see the camera comes down. And he said, you can see right here, there's an artery, and I've got this artery clamped off. And I don't think you can see that. So he lets the clamp go, and the blood goes everywhere, and all the kids go crazy. And, it was an entirely digital experience. But I have to tell you, there were a lot of kids, there were a few adults too, who found it pretty remarkable in that setting, all done digitally. There was a whole group of adults in the back of the room, and I asked the director, why are there so many adults here? And he said, you know who they are? They're people who are going to be having that surgery in the future, and they want to see it digitally first. Big data visualization. More and more we have the opportunity to get big data real time. How we present complex issues in a way that the public will understand. If it's climate change, or if it's your local weather environment, or if it's complex issues involving health. The ability to get that big data into a form that the public can understand is done most effectively through data visualization techniques. And we're seeing it more and more in the museum environment. Gaming. What's interesting is that gaming is viewed as a very personalized activity. And there is so much that goes on that involves just me, or me and you. But the idea of creating that as a group dynamic in a group setting is a bit of a challenge for us, because fundamentally we are trying to get this balance between a highly personalized experience and something that the groups can interact with in a peer-to-peer learning environment. Moving gaming up to a level where it can have a group dynamic is becoming more and more effective and seen more and more often in the Science Center environment. Mobile technologies. I think we all recognize the ways in which mobile technologies are being used today in these settings. I happen to refer to the one in St. Louis because they did a very good job in linking in one organized way your visit to the Science Center, organizing how you will travel through the Science Center, to additional information that you may receive in the Science Center, to places where you can go once you're finished with the Science Center to learn more and to get involved, all on your mobile app. That's precisely what we want the extending beyond the 4 walls experience to really represent. Now, when we talk about an extended or a substituted experience that is accessible to all, and you hear these terms periodically, I was absolutely stunned by this statistic that the Institute for Museum and Library Services did a comprehensive survey of visitor experiences at museums. And people came back and said, we love the museum. And so they re-examined those statistics in that comprehensive survey and found out that 75% of the people who had a great museum experience had not visited the museum. They'd visited the website for the museum, or interesting information that linked them to the museum. Now this is recent data. As far back as 2006, even then, it was 50% of those surveyed who said, we haven't actually been to the museum. It tells you what the power is of extending beyond your 4 walls through digital technology. Now, there are ways to look at this. One is what I would call museum supporting. And more what we're seeing now are people who go to the museum, they see the exhibit, they hold their digital device in front of the exhibit, and they gather more information that takes them deeper into the subject matter, more than you could do in the space that you have allotted to you in the museum. Very, very powerful experience. There is then what I call the museum enhancing experience, which is visit the collection, explore the collection, play some games, do some activities around the collection, and then decide where you want to go next from what you have learned. It makes it a little bit more interactive, where from each piece that I learned takes me down another path. Another interesting experience, this is the Koshland Science Museum, which purposely emphasized that most of their activities in key areas, climate change being one of them, would be online. So you visit the museum, you get a preview of what you're going to do when you go online. It's a wonderful balance to propel you toward the digital experience. Oops, I know I hit that one too fast, and I didn't want to do that. This is another example of the Exploratorium, and it was referenced a little bit earlier, that you can also create web experiences that are entirely connected to the science of what you're speaking about in your science museum without actually connecting to an exhibit at all. You just go into topics that are relevant to activities in your museum, but you don't have to literally connect to the exhibit. Okay, the next one I'm not going to show you all the way, but I just have fun with this. This is an entirely online experience that the Museum of Science in Boston put together called Diagnose a Mouse. Now, basically what's happening here, and the only reason I'm showing you this is there's an old adage that says, the one thing you can't do at a museum is invite people and their families to come on Saturday and talk to them about cancer. Well, that's changing through digital technologies. What they're doing online here is they're diagnosing cancer in a mouse. And you do the exercise, you do all of this, and then this is an entirely online experience. But then when you go to the museum, they have discussions about health and cancer and issues of that sort. And most people are saying, saw your online Diagnose a Mouse, really cool. Came and learned a little bit more about it when I got there. Digital technology driving you to the museum. Great experience. Sometimes we have created entirely virtual museums, virtual science centers, because there simply is not a museum in the location. This happens to be an exercise that we did as an association in Africa with some UNESCO support, and it was primarily allowing us to sort through all kinds of global issues in a virtual science center because there was no science center in the area, and to have a digitized way of doing it was the only way, and it turned out to be a very effective way. When we talk about personalization, exchangeability of information, now it's about bookmarking, it's about social tagging, it's about crowdsourcing. I don't know how many of you all of course are perfectly familiar with quantum levitation. I know you all talk about this all the time. So this is an exhibit that existed in our science centers, and very few people knew about it. But we took this small video and looked at it, copied it, put it on YouTube, and in 72 hours we had 7.5 million hits. We now had 9.5 million hits. No one knew that this exhibit existed, but once we got it onto the digital platform, everyone wanted to know about quantum levitation. They started copying this and doing different types of activities. It's pretty cool, isn't it? Everybody stands and watches the rotating dry ice. So when we talk about inspiration and curiosity and creativity, when we focus on those words, you often hear workforce driven. You hear applied. You hear a movement in that direction. And that tends to drive us toward the digital design and fabrication activities. This is the Fab Labs. This is the tech shops. This is the maker fairs. This is the DIY hacker mentality. And we're seeing more and more and more of this in our science center settings. We're seeing places where teens are in fact coding, and they are getting involved in the connection between software development and production through 3D printing and issues of that sort. And they're tending to mix what we're creating in some of these cases. This is in Richmond. They literally have put in space, which is just called the mix, and where young people will come together and do their hacking in an environment that is a peer-to-peer sharing type interactive environment. It is critically important when we move into digital technology that we consider the measurable aspect of this. Can we really monitor the impact? Are we sure that we are evaluating and analyzing and then modifying those aspects of the use of the digital technology to ensure their effectiveness? One program which I absolutely love, if you get to the New York Hall of Science in Queens, you have to see this program. It's called SciPlay. And basically what they do is they invite young people to come in and play. And while they play, they monitor their activities, they record them, they digitize them, and then they give that information back to the teachers in the form of information about basic physics. When the child went up the slide and came down the slide, they monitored it. When the child went up the slide again and came down the slide in a burlap sack a whole lot faster, they monitored that. When the child went up, came down with rubber around them, came down a little slower, they monitored that. The next day in the classroom, that is a science discussion with the child, with the experience that the child just had, and with a sense of understanding and peer-to-peer interaction. Fantastic project linking on-site activities with digital technologies. We also have programs like 21 Tech, which involve several of our science centers, that are actually looking at how effective are their own facilitators in using these personal mobile technologies on the floor with the visitors. So rather than just step up to the visitor and say, let us tell you a little bit about what you're seeing, they do some of that, but then they say, let us show you. And they bring out their iPads and they show that information and they drive the discussion deeper, and they encourage those visitors to take that experience and go do more with it. So finally, folks, my message here to you is that the digital age is providing increasingly personalized entertainment, increasingly personalized educational opportunities. We are challenged to, we the science centers, are challenged to attract our audiences with real experiences, but to incorporate those virtual dimensions, those multisensory, those contextualized experiences in such a way that immersive experience will be both entertaining and exciting, but also knowledge creating at the same time. And I will tell you that the issue is no longer whether to use the media to enhance the museum experience, but simply how we're going to go about doing it. I put this slide up here last because I always have to remind folks that digital as it may be, never forget the real experience, because it really does make a difference. Thank you all.